Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we start talking about public education and could go on forever with everything that's happening in today's public ed world. So let's sort of step back and breathe a little bit. Let's sort of take our time talking about some things that we've touched on, are important enough to talk about again, and so forth. I had on s2e36 last week about her second book. And I will share with you that we had such a good discussion that she called me offline later in the week, and she asked me to be part of a leadership program that she already does. She has a kids leadership and empowerment course that she has made available to kids, usually ages 11 to 14. And they've asked her for leadership, but she felt that she needed somebody else to do that, especially because these kids are students. So she asked me to consider becoming part of her Success Door online course stable, so to speak. And so what I'll be doing with her is writing a curriculum for ages 11 through 14 for kids to use what they've gotten from her as far as entrepreneurship, public speaking, and develop those skills into the next step of leadership while becoming college and career ready. So be looking for more information on that. It will be online, so it would be open to anybody who fall into those ages and whose kids and parents are interested in their kids developing those leadership skills. So I just thought that was interesting, the way that developed. And we certainly always want to bring you the opportunity to have available for your kids quality programming and courses which will help your kids stand apart from everyone else, because basically that's how you get those scholarships, and you get the opportunities to be exposed to things that you wouldn't otherwise get exposed to. Just think about this. Neetu is Indian. And so if your child took part in a course like that, your child, assuming that not everybody is Indian on this show right now, and so we might have kids who are African American, Hispanic, or white, join us. And so we would have this network of kids who get to know each other and learn leadership together, and then maybe learn from each other, learn about the different cultures while learning leadership. Wouldn't that be fantastic? So that's coming, and that's, again, adults collaborating over empowering kids. So I hope that that's something that really catches your attention, and you look forward to hearing more about. And another check back for me, last week we talked about the first month of school. Did you get a chance to do any of those things? Did you get a chance to check with your teacher? Knowing if your teachers reached out to you in a way that makes you feel comfortable about how your school is communicating with you? And if so, that way we have happy teachers, happy parents, right? And if you're a happy parent with a happy kid, remember to use the, let's see, it's the other checklist that I did for you, and that is the, here it is, Ways to Keep Your Teacher Happy checklist. Here's the first month of school checklist, Ways to Keep Your Teacher Happy checklist, and here's the Before School Starts checklist, but we'll put that one away for now until next year. So, if you've not felt like your teacher has communicated well with you, did you do any of the interventions that I mentioned? Did you reach out? Did you sort of say, hey, how you doing? How's your school year going? And, by the way, how's my darling doing? Did you find out when progress reports are due? And Have you gotten your login for your grade portal? All of those things need to be part of your just, again, first month, first 5 or 6 weeks of school practice as a parent. And I'll tell you what I have done also. I sent that checklist not only to my old school, but I also put it on LinkedIn. And if you're a parent, that's easy to tap into. If you're a teacher, this is what I did for the superintendent of my old school district. And I said, this is how I would use this. I would use it as a, hey, teachers, this is what a good parent, an instinctive parent, or parents who have been trained by some public education experts, this is what they're asking parents to do. So, hey, teachers, I'm going to ask you to self-reflect. Have you been communicating with parents? Have you gotten your grades in? Have you gotten your grades into where they can be seen in the grade portal by students and parents? Have you made sure you don't have any 68s and 69s? All of those reflection questions. And by the way, I added my favorite one now since the pandemic. Are you self-caring for the teacher? We said that for the parent on that list. We also, of course, added it to the teacher because that needs to be always now part of our work in supporting teachers, reminding teachers and educational staff how important it is to self-care. And again, self-care can be a 20-minute bubble bath, at the end of your night. Maybe the kids are in bed, or maybe, while they're finishing up homework and so forth, but taking me time in a way that models that for kids, always important. So, just reminders that these are things that in our busyness, as we get back into our busy schedules, I went to my grandson's first T-ball game on Saturday. And so I know that T-ball and other type of sports are in session. It's interesting, in Texas, they're not being canceled, but in Kentucky, where my 11-year-old granddaughter was on a softball team, that's been canceled for the season because of COVID. So depending on where you are, it depends on what kind of openness your state has towards those type of events. But at least here, we're getting right back into the busy schedule. My grandson, who is 5, he golfs, he has golf lessons, and then he does school, of course, and then he has T-ball. He has swim lessons because every Wednesday, my husband and I go and we do our babysitting gig. We meet them at swimming, and then we take over and we watch him do his swimming lessons, and then we take him out for an ice cream or something and have an extra couple hours with him. So that busy pre-COVID stuff is gearing up and making sure that this time we parents, we educators work that self-care in needs to be part of our routine, where maybe it wasn't before. Matter of fact, I don't know that self-care, that phrase, was even on our radar, was it? I don't think so. But so let's talk about something about caring and the way we show self-care to our kids in an odd way. And so you say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is we have states here in the country that are choosing to show grade equity or education equity in a way that may not maybe lead to the type of high expectations that we would hope. So let me tell you about it first and let you start making your own conclusions. So as you know, grades have plummeted across the country due to the pandemic. We had the 1920 school year was the second half online learning. 2021 Most districts started online if they were lucky at some point. Many by the middle of the first semester, some by the end of the first semester were able to have some kids back in school, but it was just messy, right? It was messy. It was virtual. It was virtual in school. Even if you were in school, the teachers were having to do both the in school and virtual at the same time. So really, those kids who were at school got the same curriculum, lack of teaching, than the ones at home, except that if they did have a question, they had the teacher right there, where it's a little harder if you were virtual. But it was just messy. So because we had, unfortunately, the lowering of grades, as some of you may have heard me say in the Dallas area, in Texas area, 40% of kids failed the math test, 30% failed the English reading test. And so, but here, we have a state of Oregon. Oregon is, they've just always been a little softer than other states. Even before the pandemic, 60% of their kids were not reading on grade level. And so what they've done is Oregon Governor Kate Brown has quietly signed a brand new bill that hands all Oregon students a high school diploma, irrespective of whether they can read, write, or demonstrate proficiency in math. In other words, Oregon is lowering the bar and lowering expectations, granting students the credential of an effective K-12 education without making sure they're equipped with the fundamental skills they need for a successful life. So they're doing this in pursuit of education equity. Proponents of the governor's decision claim that Oregon's existing standards resulted in fewer minority students graduating high school. So in the governor's world, the solution was simple: lower the bar and increase graduation numbers. This is ex-Governor Jeb Bush from Florida, and he is using his experience to comment upon this. And so I'll give you both sides, and then you can be the one to decide if you want to live in Florida or you want to live in Oregon. What Brown is saying is that the school system is fine. It's the kids who are broken. Frankly, Jeb Bush doesn't find this the right thing to do. He finds it a backwards approach that underestimates the potential of every student and lets the system charged with educating the rising generation off the hook for providing kids with quality education they deserve. As a former governor who used data to inform policy, I didn't have to dig much before seeing how Oregon's approach is deeply flawed and sets up students for a dangerous path. Oregon students already are underperforming. So in 2016, 17, 18, 19, all of Oregon students trailed the national average in the state's four-year high school graduation rate. Black and white students were about 10% lower than the national average for their peers. Oregon students deserve a quality education, not artificial attempt at education equity. And as you peel back the onion, the sting gets worse. According to the 2019 Nation's report card, more than 60% of Oregon's 4th and 8th grader students are reading below grade level. That was pre-pandemic, folks. As governor of Florida, I faced a similar challenge. I believed then, as I do now, in the potential of every student. Instead of lowering expectations, we raised them and demanded excellence from our educators and our schools. So in 98, the year I took office, Florida's graduation rate was an appalling 52%, the worst in the nation, with only 42% of Black students graduating on time. And our 4th grade students' reading abilities lagged behind the nation's average by more than half a grade. After more than 2 decades of increased rigor, higher expectations, and steady improvement, Florida's high school graduation rate is now 87%, so 25% increase, which is above the national average and represents a 35-point increase. Even more impressive is the performance of Florida's Black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged students, students with limited English proficiency, and students with disabilities. They are all graduating at the above or beyond national average. And our fourth graders now are reading 6 points above the national average, representing a 13-point increase. This significant academic growth demonstrates what happens when you raise expectations. The kids will rise up to meet them. Just look at Florida's Hispanic students who are today reading at nearly half a grade above their peers. The best form of education equity is setting high expectation for all students, providing resources to help underserved students meet those high expectations, and offering more choices and flexibility to families so that they can craft the best education for their children. Governor Brown needs only to look at other parts of the country to know that her approach is flawed. 12 years ago, Minnesota similarly lowered expectations, and by 2018-19 school year, graduation rates for Minnesota's Black students and economically disadvantaged high schoolers was about 10% lower than their peers at the national average. Despite ample evidence, Oregon isn't alone in its backwards approach. California and Virginia also lowered their students' expectations in pursuit of social justice, and that's just a matter of time before more progressive follow suit and embrace this regressive, harmful approach to education. 3 decades ago, Ronald Reagan reminded us that our country's potential and greatness is never more than one generation away from extinction. Now more than ever, education is critical to the success of our children and our nation. The effort political leaders, policy leaders, administrators, educators, and parents pour into the rising generation pays off in dividends. But for every corner we cut, for every student who is shortchanged, for every student who isn't given the education they deserve, we aren't reaching a more equitable state, but rather we're plummeting into a downward spiral. So this leads me to think about the many times that I've said on here why I do this show. I do the show because we need to make sure that our kids are well-funded, well-educated, and graduate with the potential to go beyond the minimum wage. And that still continues to be the case, folks. That still continues to be the reason why I do the show, the reason why we must continue to become and stay public ed advocates for our students. And we do that by staying current in what's happening in public education. If you happen to live in one of those states mentioned, Oregon, California, Virginia, Minnesota, sounds like they figured it out though, you might let your legislator know how you feel about education equity and lowering the bar so that more can graduate, but not college and career ready. And again, when I say college and career ready, let's make sure everybody understands and stays on the same page. Not everybody was meant to go to a 4-year college. We have vocational school, we have the military, we have other very necessary avenues to pursue for our young people. And they're all very much needed. We need more people in vocational schools. You know, if we had more plumbers, if we had more electricians, we might not have to pay so much when we have a problem in one of those areas, right, in our homes. But we don't have that many. And goodness gracious, they are, frankly, we pay as much for them as we do doctors. Think about that. So whenever I hear of a child, we had in the last graduating class that we had this past June, we had somebody who was going to be a welder. Well, you know, I congratulated that young man because I knew that he was going to be making the big bucks before almost anybody else in his graduating class, because welders are so needed right now. So being able to make sure that our kids have high expectations, that they have adults in the high schools who are sort of mining these kids' skills for potential career opportunities is what you should be having in your schools. You know, one of the things that I'll be doing when I write this course that I mentioned at the beginning of the show was that part of it has got to be not only educating the kids, but educating the parents. I need to make sure the parents are as savvy and as comfortable understanding high school requirements as hopefully their kids are. And many times kids are not. I mean, I take this from experience. I have an now 18-year-old grandchild, but when she was 16, I asked her the same question I ask a lot of kids and parents. What is your child's, what is your high school endorsement, child? And it's just like, deer in the headlight. They don't know. So, and you say, well, how does a child not know? Well, because they signed up for the endorsement at the end of 8th grade, then they start taking classes and it all becomes a blur. And, unless you have a very savvy counselor or other college readiness person who is talking to kids regularly, the kids aren't understanding that courses that they're taking are a cohesive sequence of courses that should lead them hopefully to even a certificate before they graduate high school. But oftentimes that's not happening in your comprehensive high schools. And the kids graduate, they may have applied to a college, they may have gotten accepted, but it's a lackadaisical effort, and they may or may not get there, depending. And that's unfortunate. You know what? A lot of it depends on, if they have a pretty good job that they, got coming out of college, high school, and they're making what they think is decent money and it's paying for gas and maybe a car. They're not thinking, even though I'm paying my bills, I still need to go to college because I need to reach that potential in myself to be able to make a better wage than I'm making now. But, unless you've got advocates as parents and as high school adults, it doesn't come together a lot of times for our young people. So I hope that by my reminding you week after week after week that you become a better high school, college, and career readiness advocate for your grandchild, your child, for your students, for your nephew, for your niece, for those of you, those in your life who, you see as having much potential, but maybe it's not being, the adults around them don't seem to be paying much attention to it in a readiness way. So, oftentimes we have people who graduate from high school and college who will say, if it hadn't been for that one person, whether it's my mother, my father, my uncle, my neighbor, my teacher, that one adult who took that special interest in the child and made sure that child's potential was reached, whether it was just getting through high school and then beyond, getting through to college, but you may have to be that adult for a child or some children. So, all right, enough of preaching for that. Next week, I'm excited. I'm going to have on somebody that we've chatted with several times before. In the past, we've chatted with her as a mother of kids in public education during the pandemic. And what was interesting about Jessica Perkey was that she not only was a mom of, she was mom of one at the time who was in elementary, and I think she had one in preschool, and then she had a baby. Well, now, here she is several years later. She has a 6th grader, a 1st grader, and a preschooler. And she's moved from Georgia to Kentucky because she's a military wife. And all of this happened during the pandemic. So we've talked to her from a parent standpoint. But guess what happened? She is now that her last one is in preschool, she applied for and got a job in her child's school. So this week has been her first week in public education. So I thought it would be interesting to talk to her about what it's like to be not only, of course, a continuing parent in our pandemic years, but also now a new employee in public education. So she should have, as a matter of fact, she texted me after her first day and said, I get it now. Oh my gosh. So, it's one thing to be a mother of school-age kids, but it's another to work in a school. So let's look forward to hearing from her and hear her first week stories of working in a public education setting during the pandemic in this case, Kentucky. As always, our time runs quickly when we're together, and I thank you for being with us. I won't spend time talking about the advocacy since I wove it into the show today, but as always, thank you for being on. Thank you for spreading the news. I hope that you will encourage others. And I'd like to add a new feature if I can get some of you to write me some questions that you have, some issues, just some wonderings about the goings on in public education, whether it's a school setting, whether it's a classroom setting, and we'll read them on the air and I'll talk about why that may be what's happening. And let's see if we can get a regular segment going on that. All right, everyone. Thank you again for being on, and we'll see you again next week.